The phone call that destroyed my life came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I know the exact time because I was grading freshman essays about the most embarrassing moment of my life when Madison's voice drifted through our paper-thin bedroom wall. "God, Jenna, I can't believe I settled for this," she whispered, thinking I couldn't hear. "Chris makes $42,000 a year teaching high school English. Grant's offering you a penthouse, and what do I get? A husband who can't even fix our broken garage door." Her laugh was like glass breaking, sharp, final. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I know, right? That was Jenna, Madison's younger sister. Grant says Chris looks like he shops at Goodwill, which he probably does. More laughter. More glass. I set down my red pen and listened to my wife of 8 years discuss my inadequacies with her gold-digging sister. Madison owned a boutique downtown called Refined, which was ironic considering what I was hearing. She made decent money selling overpriced scarves to suburban housewives, but lately she'd been acting like she was running Nordstrom. "The worst part is how he thinks he's so clever," Madison continued. "Always making those stupid jokes like he's some kind of stand-up comedian. It's embarrassing when we're out with real adults." Real adults. I'd been teaching teenagers for 15 years, helping them discover Steinbeck and Shakespeare. But apparently, that didn't qualify me as a real adult. "You should see Grant's new Tesla," Jenna said. "He's taking me to Napa next weekend, first class. Meanwhile, you're stuck with a guy who thinks Olive Garden is fine dining." I actually preferred cooking at home, but facts weren't important in this conversation. "I'm thinking about it," Madison said, her voice dropping lower. "Grant's been attentive. He understands what I need." My stomach dropped. Attentive. That was a loaded word coming from my wife about her sister's boyfriend. "Madison, you're not serious." "Why not? Chris won't even notice. He's too busy grading papers and watching old movies. When's the last time he surprised me with anything?" Last month, I'd surprised her with tickets to see Hamilton in Chicago. She'd complained about the drive. "Grant has connections," Madison continued. "He could help expand the boutique, maybe even franchise it. Chris just exists. He's like furniture. Reliable, boring furniture." Furniture. 15 years together, and I was furniture. I stood up quietly and walked to our bedroom door. Through the crack, I could see Madison pacing in her silk pajamas, phone pressed to her ear, animated in a way she never was with me anymore. "I deserve better than this, Jenna. I'm 35 years old. I'm not going to waste the rest of my life with someone who has no ambition." No ambition. I'd published 3 short stories in literary magazines. I coached the debate team to state championships 2 years running. I volunteered at the animal shelter every Saturday. But none of that mattered because I didn't drive a Tesla. "You know what Grant said about Chris last week?" Jenna's voice was gleeful through the speaker. "He said Chris looks like he's given up on life, like he's already gone and just doesn't know it yet." Madison laughed again. That same glass-breaking sound. "That's terrible," she said, but she was still laughing. "But not wrong." Not wrong. My own wife thought I looked gone. I backed away from the door and sat heavily on the couch. Around me were the remnants of our shared life. Wedding photos, books I'd recommended that she'd never read, the throw pillows she'd insisted on buying. Everything looked different now, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. I learned that Grant was some kind of venture capitalist, that he'd offered to take Madison to Dubai, and that my wife had been thinking about her options for months. When she finally hung up and came to bed, I pretended to be asleep. She slipped in beside me without a word, and I lay there in the darkness, listening to her breathe, wondering how long she'd been thinking of me as furniture. The next morning, Madison was cheerful at breakfast, asking about my day, commenting on the weather, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't spent the previous night planning my emotional funeral with her sister. "Don't forget," she said, buttering her toast with precise strokes. "We're having dinner at Jenna and Grant's place Saturday. He's excited to meet you properly." Excited to meet the furniture properly, she meant. "Looking forward to it," I said, and for the first time in years, I meant it. The rest of the week crawled by like a wounded animal. Every interaction with Madison felt like performance art. She'd ask about my classes, and I'd wonder if she was already composing stories about my boring day for Grant's amusement. She'd suggest we watch a movie together, and I'd think about her calling me furniture while snuggled against my chest. Thursday afternoon, I was in my classroom after hours, supposedly grading quizzes on The Great Gatsby. Instead, I was staring at Madison's iPad, which she'd left in my car that morning. Her password was our anniversary date. Of course it was. Even her deceptions were predictable. The text messages were worse than I'd imagined. Grant, can't wait to see you Saturday. Wear that black dress. Madison, the one Chris bought me for Christmas, perfect. He'll never suspect. Grant, poor guy. Does he know he's married to a goddess? Madison, he thinks I'm lucky to have him. It's almost sad. Grant, almost, but not quite. You deserve someone who appreciates what he has. Madison, someone like you? Grant, someone exactly like me. There were dozens of messages like this going back 3 months. Flirtation disguised as friendship, emotional infidelity dressed up as innocent conversation, and through it all, I was the punchline. The oblivious husband, the furniture. But the worst part wasn't the messages between Madison and Grant. It was the group chat Madison had with Jenna and 3 of her boutique friends, Sarah, Kim, and Rachel. They called it Girls' Truth Time. Madison, Chris actually asked if I wanted to go camping this weekend. Camping. Like I'm going to sleep on the ground and pee in the woods. Sarah, ew, my ex used to suggest stuff like that. So gross. Kim, at least he's trying. My husband just plays video games. Madison, trying to drag me down to his level. Grant would never suggest camping. He's taking us to that new rooftop restaurant downtown. Rachel, the one with the 2-hour wait list? How'd he manage that? Madison, he knows people. That's what real success looks like. Jenna, Chris probably thinks Applebee's is upscale dining. Madison, he does. Last month he suggested we splurge on Red Lobster for my birthday. I gone inside. We'd gone to Red Lobster because Madison had mentioned craving seafood, and it was what I could afford on a teacher's salary. But apparently, my attempt to give her what she wanted was just another source of mockery. The messages went on for months. Every kind gesture I'd made, every attempt to be thoughtful, every moment of vulnerability I'd shared with my wife had been dissected and ridiculed by her and her friends. I wasn't just furniture to Madison. I was a joke, a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when you settled for less. By Friday afternoon, I'd read every message, seen every photo, understood every reference. I knew that Grant had sent Madison flowers at the boutique just because. I knew that she told her friends I was boring and emotionally unavailable. I knew that she'd been planning to ask for a separation after the holidays. I also knew something else, something Madison and her friends didn't know, despite all their gossiping and scheming. Grant Whitmore wasn't who he claimed to be. I'd spent my lunch break researching him online, using the detective skills I'd developed as a teacher, tracking down plagiarized essays. Grant's LinkedIn profile was impressive. MBA from Northwestern, 5 years at Goldman Sachs, currently managing partner at Midwest Venture Solutions. But LinkedIn profiles can be edited, and I'd learned to spot inconsistencies. Grant claimed to have worked at Goldman Sachs from 2018 to 2023, but his supposed Northwestern MBA was dated 2020. That would mean he'd earned his graduate degree while working full-time at one of the most demanding investment banks in the world. Possible, but unlikely. A deeper dive revealed more problems. Midwest Venture Solutions had a website, but it was generic. Stock photos, vague language about identifying emerging opportunities, no specific client testimonials or case studies. The address listed was a virtual office space that rented mailboxes to entrepreneurs. Most damning of all, I found a Facebook profile for a Grant Whitmore from Milwaukee who looked exactly like Jenna's boyfriend. This Grant worked at a car dealership and had been posting complaints about his ex-wife's alimony payments as recently as 6 months ago. Either there were 2 identical Grant Whitmores in the Midwest, or my wife was planning to leave me for a used car salesman with delusions of grandeur. I printed everything. Bank records showing Midwest Venture Solutions had never filed corporate tax returns. Social media posts proving Grant's real employment history, even a photo of him in a Hyundai dealership uniform, name tag clearly visible. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Jenna and Grant lived in a downtown loft that probably cost more per month than I made in 3. The building was all exposed brick and industrial chic, the kind of place that appeared in magazines about urban living. Madison had been talking about it for weeks, dropping hints about how sophisticated it was compared to our suburban ranch house. "Remember to be nice," Madison said as we rode the elevator to the 15th floor. She was wearing the black dress Grant had requested, and she looked stunning. Grant's had a stressful week at work. "What kind of stress does a venture capitalist face?" I asked innocently. "Bad investments? Market volatility?" "I don't know the details," Madison said quickly. "Something about a deal falling through." The elevator opened directly into the loft. Jenna greeted us with air kisses and champagne flutes, playing hostess like she was born to it. She was 28, blonde, and had perfected the art of looking expensive without actually being expensive. Her dress was designer, but I recognized it from Madison's boutique. Her jewelry was impressive, but I'd seen similar pieces at the mall. "Chris," she exclaimed, like we were old friends instead of reluctant relatives. "Grant's so excited to finally spend some quality time with you." Grant emerged from the kitchen carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my car payment. He was tall, tan, and had the kind of confident smile that came from years of convincing people to trust him with their money. His handshake was firm, his eye contact steady, his whole demeanor radiating success. "Chris, buddy," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Madison's told me so much about you. High school English, right? That must be rewarding." The pause before rewarding was perfectly calculated, long enough to suggest he'd searched for a polite word to describe my pathetic career, short enough to maintain plausible deniability. "It has its moments," I said. "What about you? Madison mentioned you're in venture capital." "That's right. Midwest Venture Solutions. We identify emerging opportunities in the region, help promising entrepreneurs scale their operations." He delivered the line smoothly, like he'd practiced it. "Always looking for the next big thing." "Fascinating. What kind of companies are you working with currently?" Grant's smile flickered for just a moment. "I can't get too specific, you understand. Confidentiality agreements. But we're looking at some exciting tech startups, a few renewable energy plays. The key is getting in early before the market recognizes the potential." It was a perfect non-answer. Vague enough to sound impressive, specific enough to seem knowledgeable, impossible to verify without seeming rude. "Grant just closed a huge deal," Jenna added, sliding her arm through his. "Tell them about the solar company." "It's still in due diligence," Grant said modestly. "But if it goes through, we're looking at a potential $10 million investment. Could be a game changer for renewable energy in the Midwest." Madison was hanging on every word, her eyes bright with admiration. This was what she wanted, I realized. Not just money, but the story that came with money. The narrative of success, of importance, of being connected to something bigger than suburban mediocrity. "That's incredible," Madison said. "Chris, can you imagine working on deals worth millions of dollars?" "I can't," I admitted. "My biggest deal this week was convincing the school board to buy new copies of To Kill a Mockingbird. We're talking maybe $300. Everyone laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that included me. It was the kind that used me as a punchline. Dinner was an elaborate production. Grant had hired a private chef, and we ate courses with names I couldn't pronounce while discussing topics I couldn't contribute to. Madison and Jenna talked about expanding the boutique. Grant shared war stories from the world of high finance. I sat there, nodding and smiling, playing the role of the boring husband who was grateful to be included. "The thing about success," Grant said over dessert, "is that it requires vision. You have to see opportunities that other people miss. You have to be willing to take risks." "Like what kind of risks?" I asked. "Well, take Madison's boutique, for example." Grant gestured with his wine glass. "She's built something beautiful, but she's thinking too small. One location, local clientele, limited growth potential. With the right investment and strategy, refined could be a regional brand, maybe even national." Madison's face lit up. "Really? You think it has that kind of potential?" "Absolutely. You've got the eye, the taste, the business instincts. You just need someone who understands how to scale operations, how to access capital markets, how to think bigger." "And you could help with that?" Madison asked, leaning forward. "I'd be honored to help," Grant said, his voice warm with sincerity. "In fact, I've been thinking about it since Jenna first showed me your store. There are some venture capital funds that specialize in retail expansion. I have relationships with the decision makers." I watched my wife fall in love with a fantasy, not just with Grant, but with the version of herself he was selling. Madison, the successful entrepreneur, Madison, the regional businesswoman, Madison, the woman who'd outgrown her furniture husband and moved on to bigger things. "What would something like that involve?" Madison asked. "Initial investment of maybe $2 million, Grant said casually, like he was discussing the weather. "Market research, location scouting, brand development. We'd probably start with 3 or 4 additional locations, see how they perform, then expand from there. $2 million. I made $42,000 a year. In my entire career, I'd never even seen $2 million, let alone had access to it." "Of course," Grant continued, "the investor would want to see a solid business plan, proof of concept, that sort of thing. But with the right presentation, I think we could make it happen." "We?" Madison asked. Grant smiled. "Well, I'd want to be personally involved in something this exciting. Maybe take a small equity stake, help with strategic planning. It would be a real partnership." A partnership. With my wife. involving millions of dollars and strategic planning and all the time they'd need to spend together making it happen. I finally understood the game. This wasn't just about stealing my wife, it was about stealing her life, her business, her future. Grant wasn't just offering Madison a better husband, he was offering her a better existence, and she was buying every word of it. "This is incredible," Madison said, her voice breathless with excitement. "Chris, can you believe this? Everything we've worked for could actually happen." Everything we've worked for. As if Grant's fantasy investment had anything to do with the years I'd spent supporting her business, encouraging her dreams, believing in her when she didn't believe in herself. "It sounds too good to be true," I said quietly. The table went silent. Grant's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry?" he said. "It sounds too good to be true," I repeated. $2 million for a boutique in a town of 60,000 people, regional expansion for a store that sells scarves and handbags. It just seems optimistic. Madison's face flushed red. "Chris, what are you doing?" "I'm asking questions," I said. "Isn't that what you do before accepting a $2 million investment? Ask questions?" Grant leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from friendly to calculating. "What kind of questions did you have in mind, Chris?" "Well, for instance, which venture capital fund are we talking about? Who are these decision makers you have relationships with? What's your typical investment timeline?" "Those are pretty technical questions," Grant said smoothly. "I'm not sure someone outside the industry would understand the answers." Someone outside the industry. Someone like a high school English teacher who couldn't possibly comprehend the complexities of high finance. "Try me," I said. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Jenna was staring at her plate. Madison was glaring at me like I'd committed an unforgivable breach of etiquette. Grant was studying me with new interest, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. "You know what, Chris?" Grant said finally. "I like you. You're cautious, conservative. Those are good qualities in someone who's never had access to real money. But sometimes opportunity requires a leap of faith." "And sometimes," I said, "it requires due diligence." Grant's mask slipped completely. For just a moment, I saw the real person underneath the polish and the performance. He was angry, more than angry. He was threatened. "I think maybe we should call it a night," Madison said quickly. "Chris has had a long week." "Of course," Grant said, his smile returning. "We should do this again soon. Maybe next time we can talk about something more in Chris's wheelhouse. Literature, perhaps, or teaching techniques." The dismissal was perfect. Polite, subtle, and absolutely devastating. We left shortly after, Madison silent in the elevator, furious in the car. "What the hell was that?" she exploded as soon as we were alone. "Grant was trying to help us, and you interrogated him like he was a criminal." "I was asking legitimate questions about a business proposal. You were being embarrassing, and rude, and suspicious for no reason." No reason. Except that her potential investor was a fraud, her sister's boyfriend was a liar, and my wife was planning to leave me for a used car salesman with a fake MBA. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I drove home in silence while Madison listed all the ways I'd humiliated her, all the opportunities I'd probably ruined, all the reasons Grant would be justified in never speaking to us again. When we got home, she went straight to bed without another word. I sat in my study, surrounded by student essays and lesson plans, and began planning my next move. Grant wanted to play games with my wife's future. He wanted to steal my life and sell it back to me as an upgrade. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the furniture. Sunday morning, Madison slept late while I sat at my computer with coffee and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Teaching teenagers had given me certain skills that translated surprisingly well to detective work. I knew how to spot lies, trace sources, and verify claims. I also knew how to be patient, methodical, and thorough. Grant Whitmore was about to get the full academic treatment. I started with public records, real estate transactions, business licenses, court filings. The loft where we'd had dinner was leased, not owned, and the lease was in Jenna's name, not Grant's. Interesting. If he was as successful as he claimed, why wasn't he on the lease? Midwest Venture Solutions was incorporated in Illinois 6 months ago. The registered agent was a legal services company that specialized in helping people set up shell corporations. The business address was indeed a virtual office space, and according to their website, Grant had never actually rented physical office space there. More interesting, Grant's LinkedIn profile claimed he'd been managing partner at Midwest Venture Solutions for 2 years, but the company had only existed for 6 months. I dug deeper into his employment history. Goldman Sachs had a directory of current and former employees that was accessible if you knew how to look. Grant Whitmore had never worked there, Neither had anyone with his name, his photo, or his supposed credentials. The Northwestern MBA was easier to verify. I called the alumni office, claimed to be organizing a class reunion, and asked about Grant Whitmore's graduation year. After being transferred to 3 different departments, I finally spoke to someone who could access their records. "I'm sorry," the woman said, "but we don't have any record of a Grant Whitmore receiving an MBA from Northwestern. Are you sure about the spelling?" I was sure. By noon, I had a complete picture of Grant's real life. His name actually was Grant Whitmore, but he was 38 years old, not 42. He'd graduated from a community college in Wisconsin with an associate degree in business. He'd worked at various car dealerships for the past 15 years, most recently at Prestige Motors in Milwaukee, where he'd been fired 3 months ago for falsifying financing documents. His ex-wife had filed for divorce 2 years ago, citing irreconcilable differences and financial irresponsibility. The court record showed he'd been ordered to pay alimony and child support for their twin daughters, payments he'd been missing regularly since losing his job. The Tesla wasn't his. It was registered to Prestige Motors, which meant he'd probably stolen it when he was fired. Or maybe they'd just forgotten to ask for it back. Everything about Grant's life was a lie. The job, the education, the success, the car, probably even the loft. He was a middle-aged car salesman running an elaborate con game, and my wife was his primary target. But why Madison? Why go to all this trouble for a small-town boutique owner? The answer was in Madison's business records, which I had access to as her husband. Refined was more successful than I'd realized. Much more successful. Madison had been downplaying the numbers, probably to avoid making me feel bad about the income disparity. The boutique had generated almost $200,000 in revenue last year, with healthy profit margins and steady growth. More importantly, Madison had been approved for a business expansion loan 6 months ago. The bank had pre-authorized her for up to $300,000, secured by our house and her business assets. Grant wasn't trying to invest in Madison's business. He was trying to steal it. The plan was probably simple. Romance Madison, convince her to take the expansion loan, get her to add him as a business partner, then disappear with the money. Maybe he'd planned to take Madison with him initially, but given his track record with his ex-wife, he'd probably just vanish once he had access to the funds. It was a good con. Madison was lonely, ambitious, and eager to believe someone saw her potential. Grant was charming, confident, and told her everything she wanted to hear. If I hadn't overheard that phone conversation, if I hadn't gotten suspicious, if I hadn't spent my Sunday morning playing detective, it might have worked. But I had overheard. I was suspicious. And now I knew exactly who Grant Whitmore really was. The question was what to do with that information. I could confront Madison directly, show her the evidence, explain that her potential investor was actually a con artist. But would she believe me? Or would she think I was making it up because I was jealous? I could call the police, report the stolen Tesla, let them handle Grant. But that would take time, and there was no guarantee they'd act quickly enough to prevent him from manipulating Madison into making a financial mistake. I could confront Grant myself, threaten to expose him unless he left town. But that assumed he'd be intimidated by a high school English teacher, which seemed unlikely. Or I could do something else entirely. Something that would not only stop Grant's con, but also teach my wife and her friends exactly what kind of man they'd been admiring. I spent the rest of Sunday planning. By evening, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Madison came downstairs around dinner time, still cold from the night before. "I hope you're happy," she said, heating up leftover Chinese food. "Jenna called this afternoon. Grant's having second thoughts about the investment. He's concerned about your attitude." "My attitude?" "Your negativity, your suspicion, your complete inability to recognize an incredible opportunity when it's right in front of you." "Maybe he's right to have second thoughts," I said. "Maybe we should do some research before making any big decisions." Madison slammed her fork down. "Research? Chris, this is $2 million we're talking about. $2 million that could change our entire lives, and you want to research it to the end?" "I want to make sure it's legitimate." "Of course it's legitimate. Grant's a successful businessman. He knows what he's doing." "How do you know that?" "Because I'm not an idiot," Madison snapped. "Because I can recognize success when I see it. Because unlike some people, I don't assume everyone is lying just because I've never accomplished anything meaningful myself." The words hit like physical blows. Madison had never spoken to me like this before. Never been this cruel, this dismissive. Grant's influence was already changing her, making her harder, meaner, more willing to hurt the person who'd supported her for 8 years. "You're right," I said quietly. "I haven't accomplished anything meaningful. I'm just a high school teacher who doesn't understand business." What could I possibly know about identifying opportunities? Madison's expression softened slightly, like she realized she'd gone too far. Chris, I didn't mean. No, you're absolutely right. Grant's the expert here. If he says it's a good investment, then it must be. I should probably apologize for questioning him. You should, Madison agreed, relief evident in her voice. Maybe you could call him tomorrow, clear the air. I'll do better than that, I said. I'll make it up to both of you. Madison smiled for the first time in days. Really? How? Let me surprise you, I said, but I think you're going to love it. And I was absolutely certain she would, just not in the way she expected. Monday morning, I called in sick to school for the first time in 3 years. Instead of teaching Romeo and Juliet to sleepy sophomores, I was preparing for the performance of my lifetime. My first stop was Frank's boxing gym, a converted warehouse where I'd been working out twice a week for the past 5 years. Frank Kowalski was an ex-Marine who'd opened the gym after retiring from the Chicago Police Department. He was 62, built like a fire hydrant, and had the kind of practical wisdom that came from dealing with liars and criminals for 30 years. You look like hell, Frank said when I walked in at 9 a.m., and you're never here on Monday mornings. What's going on? I told him everything. The overheard phone conversation, the text messages, Grant's fake credentials, the con game, all of it. Frank listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or grunting, his expression growing darker as the story progressed. So your wife's planning to leave you for a car salesman who's trying to steal her business, he summarized when I finished. That's about the size of it. And you want to do what, exactly? I want to expose him, publicly, completely. I want everyone who's been laughing at me to see exactly what kind of man they've been admiring. Frank was quiet for a long moment, working a speed bag with methodical precision. You sure about this, Chris? Once you go down this road, there's no coming back. Your marriage is probably over either way, but if you humiliate your wife in public, it's definitely over. It's already over, Frank. She just hasn't told me yet. Maybe, but there's a difference between a quiet divorce and a public destruction. You want my advice? Always. Don't just expose the boyfriend, expose everything. If you're going to burn it all down. Make sure everyone understands exactly what kind of people they really are. Frank stopped hitting the bag and looked at me directly. But you better be absolutely certain about your facts, because if you're wrong about any of this, you'll look like a crazy, jealous husband who lost his mind. I'm not wrong. Then let's make sure you do this right. Frank had connections from his police days, people who could verify information quickly and quietly. By noon, we had confirmation of everything I'd discovered. Grant's real employment history, his theft of the Tesla, his missed child support payments, even his ex-wife's phone number. You want to call her? Frank asked, holding up the number. Not yet, but I might need to later. My next stop was the high school. I needed to use the computer lab's equipment for what I had planned, and I needed access to the school's audiovisual system. As the debate coach, I had keys to most of the building and passwords for the tech equipment. I spent 3 hours creating a presentation that would have made my students proud. Professional graphics, verified sources, clear documentation of every lie Grant had told. I included screenshots of his fake LinkedIn profile alongside his real employment records. Photos of him in his Prestige Motors uniform next to photos of him in expensive suits, court documents from his divorce, police reports about the stolen Tesla, even his real credit score, which Frank's contacts had somehow obtained. The centerpiece was a side-by-side comparison of Grant's claims versus reality. Claimed, MBA from Northwestern University. Reality, associate degree from Milwaukee Community College claimed, 5 years at Goldman Sachs. Reality, 15 years selling used cars. Claimed, managing partner, Midwest Venture Solutions. Reality, unemployed since being fired for fraud claimed, successful investor with millions in assets. Reality, 3 months behind on child support. It was devastating, comprehensive, undeniable. But I wasn't done yet. I also created profiles of everyone who'd been mocking me in Madison's group chat. Sarah, Kim, and Rachel had all shared personal information in their messages, details about their marriages, their finances, their secrets. They'd felt safe gossiping about me because they thought I'd never see their conversations. They were wrong. Sarah, who'd called my camping suggestion gross, was having an affair with her personal trainer. The evidence was in her Instagram photos and location tags, cross-referenced with her husband's business travel schedule. Kim, who'd defended me as at least trying, was secretly thousands of dollars in debt from online shopping addiction. Her credit cards were maxed out, and she'd been hiding purchases from her husband for months. Rachel had been the cruelest, suggesting that Madison deserved better than a loser teacher. but Rachel's own husband had been arrested for DUI twice in the past year, something she'd kept secret from everyone except Madison's group chat. I wasn't planning to expose the women's secrets. That would be cruel and unnecessary, but I wanted them to understand that everyone had vulnerabilities, everyone had things they'd rather keep private, and maybe they should think twice before mocking someone else's life. By 5 p.m., everything was ready. I had the presentation loaded on a thumb drive, backup copies stored in 3 different locations, and a plan that would ensure maximum impact with minimum legal risk. Madison came home excited, chattering about her day at the boutique, the customers who'd complimented her taste, the sales she'd made. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for what was about to happen to her. Almost. Grant called, she said, unpacking groceries with unusual energy. He wants to meet again this weekend. He said you mentioned wanting to apologize. I did. In fact, I have something special planned. Really? What? It's a surprise, but I think everyone's going to be talking about it. Madison beamed. I'm so glad you're being mature about this, Chris. Grant really could change our lives. I'm counting on it, I said. Saturday arrived gray and cold, perfect weather for what I had planned. Madison spent the morning at the salon, getting her hair and nails done for what she thought would be a reconciliation dinner with Grant and Jenna. She was wearing her best dress, the one she'd bought for our anniversary last year but never worn because I'd suggested Red Lobster instead of somewhere worthy of it. You look beautiful, I told her as she checked her reflection one final time, and she did. Madison had always been stunning, but tonight she practically glowed with anticipation. She thought she was on the verge of a new life, a better life, a life that didn't include me. She was right about that last part. Thank you, she said, surprised by the compliment. You look nice, too. I was wearing my best suit, the one I'd bought for job interviews back when I still thought I might leave teaching for something more lucrative. It seemed appropriate for the occasion. Are you sure you don't want to tell me what you have planned? Madison asked as we drove downtown. It's better as a surprise, but I think everyone's going to remember tonight for a long time. The restaurant Grant had chosen was called Elevation, a trendy place on the top floor of the city's newest hotel. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the downtown area, and the prices were high enough to make a statement about the kind of person who could afford to eat there regularly. Grant and Jenna were already seated at a corner table, champagne flutes in hand, looking like they owned the place. Grant stood when he saw us approaching, his smile warm and welcoming, like he'd forgotten all about my negativity from the previous weekend. Chris, Madison, he said, embracing us both. You look fantastic, both of you. Jenna air-kissed Madison and gave me a hug that felt like a performance. I'm so excited about tonight, she said. Grant says you have something special planned. I do, I said, taking my seat. But let's order first. I want everyone to be comfortable. Grant insisted on ordering wine, something expensive that he described with terms I didn't understand. The sommelier nodded approvingly, and I wondered if Grant actually knew what he was talking about, or if he was just performing confidence so convincingly that even the experts believed him. Dinner conversation was light, carefully avoiding the tension from the previous weekend. Grant told stories about his clients. Madison shared gossip from the boutique. Jenna talked about her plans to redecorate the loft. I listened and smiled and played the role of the reformed husband who'd learned to appreciate his betters. I owe you an apology, Grant, I said over the main course. Last weekend, I was suspicious and negative, and I probably ruined what should have been a celebration. Grant waved dismissively. Water under the bridge, buddy. I understand. When someone offers to change your life, it's natural to be cautious. And that's very generous of you, but I want to make it up to you, to all of you. How's that? Jenna asked. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small wrapped box. Madison, this is for you, for being patient with me while I figured out how to be worthy of the opportunities you deserve. Madison's eyes widened as she unwrapped the box. Inside was a thumb drive on a silver chain, designed to look like expensive jewelry. It's beautiful, she said, though she looked confused. What is it? It's everything I've learned about recognizing real success, I said. Everything I've discovered about the difference between people who deserve your admiration and people who don't. Grant's smile flickered slightly. That's unique. I thought we could share it with everyone, I said, standing up. In fact, I arranged for a little presentation. The restaurant had a small private dining area with audio-visual equipment for business dinners and special events. I'd reserved it weeks ago, claiming I wanted to surprise Madison with a slideshow of our relationship. The maitre d' had been happy to accommodate, especially after I'd explained that my wife was considering a significant business investment and I wanted to celebrate properly. A presentation? Madison asked as I led the group toward the private room. Trust me, I said. You're going to love this. The private dining room held about 30 people, and I'd invited exactly the right audience. Madison's friends from the boutique were there, Sarah, Kim, and Rachel, along with their husbands. Several of Grant's supposed business contacts, people he'd mentioned meeting at various networking events. Even a few of my colleagues from school, people who'd heard Madison complaining about her boring husband at faculty parties. What's all this? Grant asked, and for the first time he looked genuinely uncertain. This is me making sure everyone understands what real success looks like, I said, connecting the thumb drive to the room's projection system. The first slide was simple, the truth about Grant Whitmore. Grant went pale. Chris, what are you doing? I'm giving you the recognition you deserve, I said, advancing to the next slide. What followed was 20 minutes of systematic destruction. Every lie Grant had told, every credential he'd faked, every aspect of his constructed identity, laid out with documentation and evidence, photos of him in his car salesman uniform, court records from his divorce, police reports about the stolen Tesla, screenshots of his real social media profiles where he complained about alimony payments and bragged about stupid rich chicks he was planning to con. The room was silent except for the sound of my voice, calmly explaining each piece of evidence, connecting each lie to its corresponding truth. Madison sat frozen, her face cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and growing horror. Grant looked like he was considering running, but the exits were blocked by curious spectators. The most impressive thing about Grant, I said, reaching the final slides, is his commitment to the performance. He's been playing this character for months, never breaking, never slipping, never letting anyone see who he really is. The last slide was a photo of Grant with his ex-wife and twin daughters, taken from his real Facebook profile. They looked happy, normal, like a regular family before everything fell apart. Grant Whitmore isn't a successful investor, I concluded. He's a desperate man who thought he could steal my wife's business and disappear with the money. He's a fraud, a thief, and a deadbeat father who hasn't paid child support in 4 months. The silence that followed was absolute. 30 people staring at Grant, who was staring at the table, his carefully constructed persona crumbling in real time. Is this true? Jenna asked, her voice barely a whisper. Grant looked up, and for a moment, I saw something almost like relief in his eyes. The performance was over. The mask was off. He could stop pretending. Yeah, he said quietly. It's true. Madison made a sound like she'd been punched. All of it? All of it. The investment? The business expansion? I was going to take your expansion loan and disappear, probably to Mexico. I had it all planned out. Jenna stood up so quickly her chair fell over. You bastard. You lying, pathetic bastard. Jenna, wait. But she was already gone, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. Grant started to follow, then seemed to realize there was no point. Everyone in the room knew what he was now. There was nowhere left to run. Madison was crying, quiet tears that she wiped away with shaking hands. How long have you known? She asked me. Since last Sunday. And you planned all this? I planned all this. She looked around the room at the faces staring back at her. Her friends, her business associates, people she'd have to see every day for the rest of her life in this town. All of them now knew that she'd been ready to leave her husband for a con artist, that she'd been so eager to escape her ordinary life that she'd fallen for the most obvious lies. I hate you, she said, her voice breaking. I hate you so much. I know, I said, but at least now you hate me for something real. Madison left without another word. Grant followed a few minutes later, after the police arrived to ask him about the stolen Tesla. The other guests filtered out gradually, talking in hushed voices about what they'd witnessed. I stood alone in the private dining room, surrounded by the remnants of my marriage and my wife's dreams, watching the city lights twinkle through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was the most beautiful view I'd ever seen. The story spread through town like wildfire. By Monday morning, everyone knew about Grant's spectacular exposure at Elevation. The local newspaper ran a story about the Tesla theft, mentioning his elaborate deception of local business owners. Social media buzzed with commentary, memes, and increasingly embellished versions of what had happened. Madison didn't come home Saturday night, or Sunday. On Monday evening, she finally returned to collect some clothes, her face puffy from crying, her usual confidence replaced by something brittle and defensive. The whole town is talking about us, she said, stuffing items into a suitcase. About me? Do you have any idea what you've done? I've told the truth. You've humiliated me, publicly, in front of everyone I know, everyone I work with, everyone I have to face every day. I was sitting at the kitchen table, grading papers like it was any other Monday evening. You were going to leave me anyway. Madison stopped packing and stared at me. What? You were going to leave me anyway, I repeated. You told Jenna you were thinking about it. You were planning to take Grant's fake investment, expand the business, and start a new life without me. The only difference is that now everyone knows Grant was a fraud. That's not... I wasn't... You weren't what? You weren't planning to leave? You weren't having an emotional affair? You weren't mocking me to your friends for months? Madison sank onto the couch, her suitcase forgotten. You read my messages. I read your messages. All of them? All of them. She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and tired. I felt trapped, Chris. Like my life was getting smaller every year. You seemed happy with everything staying the same, but I wanted more. I wanted to feel like I was building something important. So you decided to build it with someone else? I decided to consider my options. That's not the same thing as leaving, isn't it? Madison looked around our living room, at the photos and books and shared memories of 8 years together. Maybe it is. Maybe I was already gone and just hadn't admitted it yet. At least you're being honest now. Are you? Are you honestly telling me this was about protecting me from Grant, or was it about punishing me for wanting something different? It was a fair question. I'd been asking myself the same thing for 3 days. Both, I said finally. I wanted to protect you from making a terrible mistake. But I also wanted everyone to see what kind of man you were willing to leave me for. I wanted them to understand that maybe I wasn't the pathetic loser you made me out to be. Madison nodded slowly. Well, you succeeded. Everyone in town knows that Grant was a fraud. They also know that I was stupid enough to fall for him, and they know that my husband is smart enough to destroy me when I betray him. Is that how you see it? As destruction? What would you call it? I thought about that. Madison was right that her reputation was damaged, probably permanently. In a town this size, people would remember the story for years. She'd always be the woman who'd almost been conned by a fake venture capitalist, the wife who'd been ready to leave her husband for a used car salesman. But she was also free now. Free from Grant's manipulation, free from the fantasy that had been consuming her, free to make real decisions about her real life. I'd call it clarity, I said. Madison laughed, but there was no humor in it. Clarity. That's one word for it. She finished packing in silence. As she reached the door, she turned back one final time. For what it's worth, Chris, I'm sorry. About the messages, about Grant, about all of it. You didn't deserve to be treated like that. No, I agreed, I didn't. But you also didn't deserve to have a wife who was that unhappy and never told you. No, I didn't deserve that either. Madison left, and I haven't seen her since. Her lawyer called the next week to discuss divorce proceedings. The settlement was straightforward. She kept the boutique, I kept the house. We split everything else down the middle. No alimony, no extended legal battle, no more drama. The boutique survived the scandal, though Madison had to rebuild her customer base from scratch. Some people stayed loyal, others were too uncomfortable with the situation to continue shopping there. She hired new staff to replace the friends who distanced themselves after the revelation. Grant disappeared entirely. The police recovered the stolen Tesla, but he was long gone by then. Jenna moved back in with her parents and eventually left town altogether. I heard she's living in Denver now, working for a marketing company, probably telling people she's from somewhere else. My colleagues at school treated me with a mixture of respect and wariness. They'd all underestimated the quiet English teacher, and now they weren't sure what to make of me. Some seemed impressed by my detective work. Others were disturbed by my willingness to destroy my own marriage in pursuit of revenge. Principal Delaney called me into her office a week after the incident. Chris, she said, I need to ask, are you okay? Because what happened at that restaurant, that was either brilliant or deeply concerning. I'm not sure which. I'm fine, Mrs. Delaney. Better than I've been in months, actually. The school board is worried about the publicity. Parents are talking. About what? About whether someone who could orchestrate something like that should be teaching their children. I hadn't considered that angle. Are you firing me? No. Your teaching record is excellent, and you didn't break any laws. But I need to know that you're stable, that this was a one-time response to an extreme situation. It was. Good. Because I'd hate to lose you. But Chris? Yes? Next time you want to destroy someone's life, maybe do it during summer vacation. I laughed, despite everything. I'll keep that in mind. 3 months later, I was still teaching, still living in the same house, still working out at Frank's gym twice a week. The gossip had mostly faded, replaced by newer scandals and fresher drama. Madison and I were officially divorced, and she was dating someone new, a lawyer from the next town over who seemed genuine, stable, and appropriately impressed by her business acumen. I was happy for her, genuinely happy. She deserved someone who appreciated her ambition, and I deserved someone who appreciated my contentment. We'd been incompatible for years, but it had taken Grant's con game to make us both see it clearly. On a Friday afternoon in late spring, I was cleaning out my desk when I found the printed emails from Madison's group chat, the ones that had started everything. I read through them one more time, remembering the anger and humiliation I'd felt when I first discovered them. Chris actually asked if I wanted to go camping this weekend. Camping, like I'm going to sleep on the ground and pee in the woods. It seemed so trivial now, so petty. Madison hadn't wanted to go camping, and that was fine. She'd mocked the suggestion to her friends, and that had hurt, but it wasn't the end of the world. The real problem hadn't been the camping trip or the Red Lobster dinner or any of the specific complaints. The real problem had been that we'd stopped seeing each other clearly, stopped appreciating what we had, stopped believing we could build something better together. Grant had exploited that disconnect, but he hadn't created it. Madison and I had created it ourselves, through years of small disappointments and unspoken resentments and the gradual erosion of respect that happens when people take each other for granted. I threw the emails away and finished cleaning out my desk. Summer vacation was starting, and I had plans. Not big plans, not life-changing plans, just good plans. I was going to read books I'd been meaning to get to, take a road trip to see my brother in Colorado, maybe even go camping by myself. And for the first time in years, I was looking forward to all of it. The doorbell rang as I was making dinner that evening. I opened it to find Sarah, one of Madison's former friends from the boutique. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure she should be there. "Hi, Chris. I hope it's okay that I stopped by." "Of course. Come in." She declined my offer of coffee and stood awkwardly in the living room, looking around at the space that had once been familiar to her. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally, "for the things we said about you in those messages. It was cruel and unfair, and I'm sorry." "Thank you. That means a lot." "I also wanted you to know that not everyone thinks what you did was wrong. Grant was a predator, and Madison was his victim. You saved her from making a terrible mistake." "I'm not sure Madison sees it that way." "She will, eventually. When she's had time to process everything, she'll understand that you were trying to protect her." I wasn't sure about that, but I appreciated Sarah's attempt to make me feel better. "How is she doing?" I asked. "Better. The boutique is recovering, and she seems happier with David. He's good for her." David was the lawyer Madison was dating. I'd seen them together once at a coffee shop, and they'd looked comfortable with each other in a way Madison and I never had. "I'm glad." Sarah nodded and headed toward the door, then stopped. "Chris, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you regret it? What you did at the restaurant?" I thought about that question for a long time after Sarah left. Did I regret exposing Grant? No. He was a criminal who deserved to be caught. Did I regret the public nature of the revelation? Maybe. It had been more dramatic than necessary, more humiliating for everyone involved. But did I regret learning the truth about my marriage? Did I regret forcing Madison and myself to confront the reality of our relationship? Did I regret ending 8 years of gradually increasing unhappiness? No, I didn't regret that at all. The truth had been painful, but it had also been liberating, for both of us. I finished my dinner, graded the last batch of essays from the school year, and settled in to watch an old movie. Something classic, something familiar, something that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with storytelling in the first place. Outside, the evening was warm and full of possibilities. Inside, I was alone but not lonely, content in a way I hadn't been for years. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like the protagonist of my own story instead of a supporting character in someone else's drama. It was a good feeling.